The business class cabin of Flight 789 glowed with soft amber light as the Boeing 777 prepared for its transatlantic journey from New York to London. Crystal champagne flutes caught the afternoon sun streaming through oval windows, while passengers in tailored suits settled into leather seats. Among them, Astrid Sterling adjusted her crimson designer dress and watched with barely concealed amusement as a man struggled with an oversized carry-on while balancing a pink backpack decorated with unicorns. Her perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her armrest as she observed him fumbling with the child's safety seat, his broad shoulders barely fitting in the aisle as he tried to secure his young daughter. Nathan Hayes felt every pair of eyes in business class, tracking his movements as he wrestled with the safety harness for 7-year-old Olivia. At 36, he stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, his frame still carrying the disciplined muscle memory of his military years, despite trading his flight suit for civilian clothes 3 years ago. His short brown hair, trimmed with the precision of someone who never quite left military habits behind, caught the cabin lights as he bent to check Olivia's seatbelt one more time. Those deep blue eyes that once tracked enemy aircraft at 30,000 feet now focused entirely on ensuring his daughter's comfort, scanning her face for any sign of anxiety about the flight ahead. Olivia Hayes pressed her small nose against the window, her brown curls bouncing with excitement as she pointed at the ground crew loading luggage below. Her bright eyes, mirrors of her father's but carrying her late mother's warmth, sparkled with the kind of wonder only children possess when faced with giant machines that somehow manage to fly. She clutched a worn sketchbook filled with drawings of aircraft, each one lovingly labeled in shaky handwriting with details her father had taught her about wing configurations and engine types. At 7 years old, she possessed a curious mind that absorbed everything her father shared about aviation, turning their apartment into a miniature aerospace museum with models they built together on quiet Sunday afternoons. Astrid Sterling observed this domestic scene with the calculating gaze of someone who measured worth in stock portfolios and quarterly earnings. At 34, she commanded boardrooms with the same ease most people ordered coffee, her blonde hair styled in a power bob that had become her signature look across Fortune 500 profiles. Her success story read like a business school case study, building her technology consulting firm from a studio apartment startup to a multi-million-dollar enterprise in just 8 years. Yet beneath the polished exterior and designer wardrobe lay scars from a past betrayal that had taught her to judge quickly and trust slowly, to measure people by their appearance and apparent status before allowing them any closer. Captain Henry Collins conducted his pre-flight checks in the cockpit, his weathered hands moving across instrument panels with the muscle memory of 25 years in commercial aviation. At 45, he had seen enough to fill several lifetimes of stories. From emergency landings in cornfields to navigating through volcanic ash clouds, his calm demeanor had earned him a reputation among crew members as unflappable, the kind of captain who could announce severe turbulence with the same steady tone he used to point out landmarks below. Today's flight manifest showed a full passenger list, and weather reports indicated possible storm systems over the Atlantic that would require careful navigation. First Officer George Miller adjusted his seat beside the captain, fighting off a wave of nausea he had been battling since lunch. At 38, he was in the prime of his career, recently promoted after 15 years of dedication to the airline. He had mentioned feeling slightly under the weather during pre-flight briefing, but assured Captain Collins it was nothing serious. Probably just something he ate at the airport food court. Neither man could have predicted how this minor discomfort would soon escalate into a crisis that would test everyone aboard Flight 789. Evelyn Brooks moved through the cabin with the practiced efficiency of someone who had memorized every inch of the aircraft. As lead flight attendant at 30, she possessed an uncanny ability to spot potential problems before they escalated, whether it was a nervous first-time flyer needing reassurance or a businessman who had one too many drinks in the lounge. Her keen eyes had already cataloged the passengers in business class, noting the tension between the elegantly dressed blonde woman and the father struggling with his luggage, while other passengers exchanged knowing glances and subtle smirks. Astrid's voice carried just enough volume to ensure neighboring passengers could hear her observation. Business class certainly isn't for everyone, I suppose. Some people really should consider whether they can afford the lifestyle before purchasing tickets. Her comment drew soft chuckles from a hedge fund manager across the aisle and an investment banker seated behind her, their amusement evident in the way they shook their heads and returned to their Financial Times newspapers. Nathan's jaw tightened imperceptibly, a micro-expression that would have been invisible to most observers but represented years of practiced restraint. He had heard similar comments before, in grocery stores when Olivia had tantrums, at school events where other parents drove luxury vehicles while he arrived in his 10-year-old pickup truck. Each time, he remembered Sarah's words from her hospital bed, her hand weak but insistent in his, making him promise to never let pride or anger affect their daughter's happiness. He had traded his fighter pilot wings for a toolbox, accepting a position as an aviation maintenance engineer that paid a fraction of his military salary, but allowed him to be home every night for bedtime stories. "Daddy, why are those people laughing?" Olivia whispered, her small hand finding his as she sensed the uncomfortable atmosphere despite not understanding its source. Nathan knelt beside her seat, his voice gentle and steady, the same tone he used when explaining why Mommy couldn't come back from heaven. "Don't worry about them, sweetheart. Some people just need to make noise. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." He pulled out her favorite book about a brave little airplane that could fly higher than all the others because it had the biggest heart, a story Sarah used to read that had become their nightly ritual. Astrid observed this interaction with a mixture of satisfaction and something else she couldn't quite identify. Perhaps a flicker of discomfort at the genuine tenderness between father and daughter. She had built her empire on reading people, on identifying weaknesses, and leveraging them in negotiations. This man's obvious financial constraints, his dated clothing, the generic brand sneakers, all pointed to someone who had no business in business class, probably someone who had saved for months, or used points accumulated over years for this single luxury experience. The plane pushed back from the gate with the subtle jolt that marked the beginning of every journey into the sky. Nathan helped Olivia locate the safety card, turning the required demonstration into a game as they had done on the few flights they had taken together. She giggled when he made sound effects for the oxygen masks dropping, her laughter, a bright note that cut through the subdued atmosphere of business travelers, focused on laptops and tablets, already open to spreadsheets and presentations. As Flight 789 climbed through 10,000 feet, the seatbelt sign dimmed and the cabin crew began their service. Nathan declined the offered champagne, requesting apple juice for Olivia instead, another detail that didn't escape Astrid's notice. She sipped her Dom Perignon while making mental notes for her presentation in London, occasionally glancing at the father and daughter who seemed absorbed in a drawing project involving what appeared to be fighter jets and clouds. The first indication of trouble came at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean. The plane shuddered. Not the gentle turbulence passengers barely notice, but a violent shake that sent drinks sliding across tray tables and caused overhead bins to rattle ominously. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows across suddenly pale faces, and a peculiar burning smell began to permeate the cabin, sharp and acrid like overheated electrical components. In the cockpit, warning lights illuminated in rapid succession, painting the dim space in reds and ambers. George Miller's face had gone from pale to ashen, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to focus on the instruments. His hands trembled as he reached for controls. And Captain Collins noticed his first officer's labored breathing, the way he kept blinking, as if trying to clear his vision. "George, are you all right?" Captain Collins asked, his tone shifting from professional to concerned as he observed his colleague's deteriorating condition. Before George could respond, his body went rigid, then slumped forward against his harness. His breathing became shallow and erratic, and his skin took on a grayish pallor that sent alarm bells ringing in Captain Collins' experienced mind. The captain immediately triggered his radio, calling for Evelyn Brooks while simultaneously attempting to maintain control of an aircraft that had begun to list slightly to starboard. The plane lurched again, this time accompanied by a sound no passenger ever wants to hear, the stuttering of an engine struggling to maintain power. Screams erupted from economy class, while business class passengers gripped their armrests with white knuckles. Astrid's champagne glass shattered on the floor, the golden liquid mixing with crystal shards, as the aircraft dropped several hundred feet in seconds before Collins managed to regain control. Captain Collins' voice crackled through the intercom, and for the first time in his career, passengers could detect the edge of urgency beneath his professional calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing some technical difficulties. I need to ask, are there any current or former pilots on board? Any pilot with experience, military or civilian? Please identify yourself to the cabin crew immediately. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the unsettling whine of struggling engines and scattered sobs from passengers convinced they were living their final moments. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, their faces masks of professional composure, even as their eyes betrayed their concern. Evelyn Brooks scanned business class, her gaze stopping on each passenger, searching for any sign of recognition or response to the captain's unprecedented request. Nathan's internal battle raged in the space of 3 heartbeats. He had made a promise to Sarah, sworn on her memory that he would never again put himself in danger, that Olivia needed a father more than the world needed another hero. His retirement from the Air Force hadn't been just a career change, but a fundamental shift in priorities, choosing playground visits over combat missions, choosing bedtime stories over briefing rooms. Yet as he felt the aircraft's unstable movement, recognizing the signs of a plane fighting to stay airborne, he knew that his promise to keep Olivia safe superseded everything else. His hand moved to his jacket pocket, fingers finding the worn leather wallet that held his identification cards. Behind his driver's license, carefully preserved despite having no official use for 3 years, was his military ID, the eagle and shield still visible beneath the lamination. Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Hayes, fighter pilot, 22nd Fighter Squadron. The photograph showed a younger man, clean-shaven and stern, eyes focused on distant horizons rather than playground swings and school recitals. Olivia grabbed his hand as the plane shook again, her small fingers interlacing with his. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" Her voice remained steady, carrying the implicit trust that whatever happened, her father would handle it, the same way he handled nightmares and scraped knees and questions about why some people had mommies and she didn't. Nathan kissed the top of her head, inhaling the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo, then stood up slowly, his movement drawing every eye in business class. He pulled out the military ID and handed it to Evelyn Brooks, who had materialized beside his seat as if summoned by his decision. Her eyes widened as she read the credentials, immediately understanding the significance of what she held. "That's my daddy," Olivia said softly but proudly, to no one in particular, her chin lifting as she watched her father follow the flight attendant toward the cockpit. He flew the fastest planes in the whole Air Force. He can fly anything. Astrid Sterling stared at the man she had dismissed as beneath her notice, watching his confident stride toward the front of the aircraft. The dated clothes suddenly looked different, the worn jacket revealing itself as military issue. The precise way he moved through the narrow aisle speaking to training and discipline rather than social awkwardness. Her champagne-clouded mind struggled to reconcile this revelation with her earlier assumptions, the cognitive dissonance creating an uncomfortable knot in her stomach that had nothing to do with the plane's erratic movement. Nathan entered the cockpit to find Captain Collins wrestling with controls, while George Miller lay unconscious, strapped in but clearly incapacitated. The instrument panel showed multiple system warnings, and Nathan's trained eye immediately cataloged the critical issues: hydraulic pressure fluctuations, engine temperature spikes, and what appeared to be a partial electrical failure affecting navigation systems. The smell of burning electronics was stronger here, and through the windscreen, he could see storm clouds building ahead, dark towers of cumulonimbus that would test even a fully functional aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Hayes, retired Air Force, F-22 Raptor pilot, Nathan announced, sliding into the jump seat behind the pilot's positions. 2,000 combat hours, another 1,000 in training and transport aircraft. "Tell me what you need, Captain." Henry Collins didn't waste time on pleasantries or verification. The crisis demanded immediate action. "First officer is down. Likely severe food poisoning or allergic reaction. We've lost partial hydraulics. Number 2 engine is running rough, and we're about to hit a storm system I can't navigate around with our current mechanical status. I need you to handle communications and systems management while I fly. Can you do that?" Nathan was already reaching for the spare headset, his hands moving across unfamiliar controls with the adaptive thinking that had made him one of the Air Force's top pilots. "Copy that, Captain. I'll need 30 seconds to familiarize myself with your panel layout. Then I'm your co-pilot. What's our nearest diversion airport?" As the 2 men worked to stabilize the aircraft, Evelyn Brooks returned to the cabin to manage increasingly panicked passengers. She moved with deliberate calm, instructing people to ensure seatbelts were fastened, stowing loose items that had scattered during the turbulence. Her voice remained steady as she repeated reassurances, even as her own heart raced with the knowledge of how serious their situation had become. In business class, Astrid found herself gripping her armrest with unprecedented fear. She had negotiated billion-dollar deals, faced hostile takeovers, and survived boardroom betrayals, but none of that prepared her for the helplessness of being trapped in a metal tube at 35,000 feet, with no control over her fate. Around her, other passengers had abandoned pretense of composure, some crying openly, others praying in whispered voices, and a few simply staring ahead in shock. Olivia Hayes sat with remarkable composure for a 7-year-old, her sketchbook open to a drawing of an F-22 Raptor she had been working on. She colored carefully, staying within the lines despite the plane's occasional shudder, as if her concentrated calm could somehow help her father in the cockpit. When the businessman beside her began hyperventilating, she offered him a piece of gum from her unicorn backpack, explaining that her daddy said chewing gum helped with ear pressure and nerves. In the cockpit, Nathan had fully integrated himself into the flight operations, his voice steady as he communicated with air traffic control while monitoring engine parameters. London Center. This is Flight 789 declaring emergency. We have partial system failure and requesting immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport. We have approximately 200 souls on board with 4 hours of fuel remaining. The storm hit them with the force of a giant's fist, rain lashing against the windscreen with such intensity that forward visibility dropped to nearly zero. Lightning split the sky in brilliant, terrifying displays, and the plane bucked like a wild horse, trying to throw its riders. Nathan's combat experience proved invaluable as he maintained his composure, calling out readings and adjustments, while Captain Collins fought to keep the aircraft stable. Altitude holding at 33,000, Nathan reported, his voice cutting through the chaos with military precision. Engine 2, temperature dropping but still in yellow range, hydraulic pressure fluctuating between 40 and 60%. We need to start descent soon, Captain, or we risk complete hydraulic failure. Henry Collins nodded grimly, appreciating the calm competence of his unexpected co-pilot. Together, they began calculating descent rates and approach vectors, factoring in their mechanical limitations and the weather conditions. The nearest suitable airport was Shannon in Ireland, still 90 minutes away under normal conditions, but nothing about their current situation was normal. The descent through the storm tested every skill both men possessed. Nathan called out altitude and speed readings while managing radio communications with increasingly concerned air traffic controllers. He coordinated with emergency services on the ground, ensuring ambulances would be standing by for George and any injured passengers. His fingers flew across the flight management system, inputting corrections and monitoring their glide path, while Collins manually flew the plane through turbulence that would have challenged a fully functional aircraft. 500 feet to decision altitude, Nathan announced as they broke through the lower cloud layer to see runway lights gleaming in the Irish rain. Approach speed 150 knots, slightly high but within parameters given our hydraulic situation. Wind shear warning active. Recommend 10 degrees right correction. The first landing attempt had to be aborted when a severe crosswind pushed them off centerline just before touchdown. Nathan's steady callouts helped Collins execute a textbook go-around, despite the degraded systems, climbing back into the gray clouds for another attempt. Passengers screamed as the engines roared back to full power, the plane climbing at an angle that pressed everyone back into their seats. Astrid found herself praying for the first time since childhood, her usual cynicism stripped away by raw terror. She thought about her empty apartment, the awards and accolades that suddenly seemed meaningless, the relationships she had sacrificed for success. Beside her, she could hear Olivia's small voice saying, "It's okay, Daddy knows what to do. He promised Mommy he'd always keep me safe." The second approach began, with Nathan calling out every parameter, with the precision of a surgeon describing vital signs. 3,000 feet, on glide slope. Speed 145 knots. Hydraulic pressure holding at 55%. Wind correction applied. Centerline tracking good. His voice became the rhythm by which Collins flew, each call out a stepping stone toward safety. 1,000 feet. Stabilized approach criteria met. "Recommend continue," Nathan announced, his tone betraying no hint of the enormous pressure both men faced. 500 feet. Approaching minimums. Runway in sight, 12 o'clock. Wind check shows 15 knots from the right, within limits. The main landing gear touched down hard enough to bounce once before settling, the nose wheel following with a thump that sent relief flooding through 200 passengers. Reverse thrust roared as Collins fought to slow their momentum on the rain-slicked runway, Nathan calling out decreasing speeds while monitoring brake temperatures and hydraulic pressure. They used nearly the entire runway length before coming to a stop. Fire trucks and ambulances already racing toward their position. The cabin erupted in applause and tears of relief, strangers embracing strangers, the shared trauma of near-death creating instant bonds. Evelyn Brooks' professional composure finally cracked as she wiped tears from her eyes while directing the evacuation of George Miller on a medical stretcher. The first officer was conscious but weak, managed to give a thumbs up as paramedics wheeled him past the passengers who owed him and his colleagues their lives. Captain Henry Collins powered down the engines and turned to Nathan with a handshake that conveyed more than words ever could. "You saved us all, Nathan. That was some of the finest flying I've ever been part of. The Air Force lost a hell of a pilot when you retired." Nathan removed the headset, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline began to fade. "Just did what needed doing, Captain. Any pilot would have done the same." But both men knew that wasn't true. That the combination of combat experience, technical knowledge, and supernatural calm under pressure had made the difference between a successful emergency landing and potential catastrophe. As Nathan emerged from the cockpit, the business class cabin fell silent. The same passengers who had smirked at his struggles with luggage now looked at him with expressions of awe and gratitude. Several stood and applauded. Others simply nodded with respect, understanding that their earlier judgments had nearly cost them the opportunity to ever judge anyone again. Olivia launched herself into his arms the moment he reached their seats, her small body shaking with relief. "I knew you'd save everyone, Daddy. I told them you would." Her simple faith in him was worth more than all the medals and commendations he had earned in his military career. Media crews were already gathering outside the aircraft, having been alerted to the emergency landing and the dramatic story of the passenger pilot who had stepped up when needed most. But Nathan had no interest in interviews or accolades. He gathered Olivia's belongings, her sketchbook and unicorn backpack, preparing to disappear into the crowd of evacuating passengers, just as he had vanished from military life 3 years earlier. Astrid Sterling stood in the aisle, blocking his path. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her perfect makeup smeared by tears of fear, and her usual commanding presence had been replaced by something far more human. "Wait, please," she said, her voice lacking its earlier sharp edge. "I owe you an apology. More than that, I owe you my life. We all do." Nathan adjusted Olivia on his hip, meeting Astrid's eyes with the same steady gaze that had stared down enemy fighters. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am. I'm just a maintenance engineer who knows a bit about planes. Anyone would have done the same for their daughter." The simplicity of his response hit Astrid harder than any accusation could have. She had spent years building walls of wealth and status to protect herself from vulnerability, judging others by their surfaces to avoid seeing their depths. This man had every right to condemn her, to publicly humiliate her as she had tried to humiliate him. Yet he chose grace instead. "I was wrong," Astrid admitted, the words foreign on her tongue but necessary. "I judged you without knowing anything about you. I've spent so long measuring worth by the wrong metrics that I forgot what actually matters." She looked at Olivia, who was watching her with curious eyes. "Your daughter is lucky to have you. I hope someday someone thinks I'm worth that kind of courage." Olivia, with the innocent wisdom of childhood, tugged on Astrid's ruined designer sleeve. "You could have dinner with us," she offered brightly. "Daddy makes really good spaghetti. And we always have enough. That's what Mommy used to say. There's always room for one more friend at the table." Nathan started to object, aware of the vast social gulf between them, but something in Astrid's expression stopped him. Behind the successful CEO facade was a loneliness he recognized, the isolation that comes from building walls so high that no one can climb them. Sarah would have invited her without hesitation, would have seen past the sharp edges to the person underneath who just needed someone to see her as human. "There's a place near the airport hotel," Nathan said finally. "Nothing fancy, just good food and generous portions. You're welcome to join us if you'd like." The restaurant was indeed nothing fancy. Fluorescent lights instead of chandeliers, paper napkins instead of cloth, and menus with pictures of the food. But as the three of them sat in a worn vinyl booth, something shifted in the atmosphere. Astrid found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in years as Olivia explained the aerodynamics of French fries, using them to demonstrate how planes generate lift. Nathan shared stories from his Air Force days, carefully edited for young ears, while Olivia colored on the paper placemat. He talked about Sarah without the raw grief that had once accompanied her name, describing how they met at an air show where she was selling homemade jewelry, how she had insisted he was too serious and needed someone to remind him that not everything in life required military precision. "She sounds wonderful," Astrid said softly, understanding that this glimpse into Nathan's life was a privilege she hadn't earned but was being granted anyway. "She was," Nathan agreed, helping Olivia cut her chicken fingers into smaller pieces. "She made everyone around her better, just by being herself. She would have liked you, would have said you just needed someone to remind you that success isn't about having the most. It's about meaning the most to someone." As the evening progressed, Astrid's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from her London team about the delayed meeting, from reporters wanting her comment on the emergency landing, from her assistant with a list of urgent decisions needed. For the first time in her professional life, she turned the phone face down and ignored it all, choosing instead to focus on the present moment, on Olivia's animated description of her favorite Disney movie, on Nathan's quiet humor, on the simple pleasure of a meal shared without agenda or strategy. "I build companies," Astrid found herself saying as Olivia dozed against her father's shoulder. "I've created jobs for thousands of people, generated billions in revenue, been featured on magazine covers, but sitting here, watching you with her, I realize I've never built anything that actually matters. No one's ever going to look at me the way she looks at you, with complete trust and unconditional love." Nathan shifted Olivia gently, pulling her jacket over her like a blanket. "It's never too late to change what you're building," he said simply. "Sarah used to say that every day is a chance to choose who you want to be. The past is just practice for the present." Outside, the Irish rain had softened to a gentle mist, coating the windows with tiny droplets that caught the restaurant's warm light. Other emergency landing passengers occasionally passed by, some recognizing Nathan and nodding respectfully, but he acknowledged them with only brief smiles before returning his attention to his daughter and unexpected dinner companion. Astrid watched Nathan carry the sleeping Olivia to their hotel shuttle, his strong arms cradling her as if she were made of spun glass. She thought about her own father, distant and demanding, who had measured love in achievements and approval in acquisitions. She had become him without realizing it, building an empire on the same cold foundation that had left her emotionally bankrupt despite material wealth. "Thank you," she called out as Nathan paused at the shuttle door. "Not just for saving our lives, but for showing me what courage actually looks like. It's not about being fearless in boardrooms or conquering markets. It's about being afraid and choosing love anyway." Nathan smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Everyone's fighting something, Miss Sterling. The lucky ones have someone worth fighting for." He glanced down at Olivia, then back at Astrid. "Maybe it's time you found your someone." As the shuttle pulled away, Astrid stood in the drizzle, designer shoes soaking through, hair falling from its perfect style. She thought about the presentation waiting in London, the deals to be made, the empires to expand. Then she thought about Olivia's innocent invitation to dinner, Nathan's quiet grace, the warmth of that shabby restaurant booth. For the first time in years, she wondered if she had been climbing the wrong mountain all along. The news cycle picked up the story within hours, the dramatic tale of a humble single father who saved a plane full of people spreading across international media. But Nathan Hayes refused all interview requests, declining offers for book deals and movie rights, choosing instead to return quietly to his life as a maintenance engineer and devoted father. He had made a promise to Sarah to live for Olivia, and that didn't include fame or fortune, just presence and love. Astrid Sterling returned to her corporate world, but something fundamental had shifted. She instituted new policies at her company prioritizing work-life balance, created a foundation supporting single parents, and began measuring success not just in profit margins but in human impact. She kept a photo on her desk from a news article about the emergency landing, a grainy image of Nathan carrying Olivia across the tarmac, a reminder that true strength isn't about power over others, but responsibility for them. Months later, she received a hand-drawn invitation in Olivia's careful printing to attend her school play. Nathan had included a note saying Olivia had insisted on inviting the nice lady from the airplane who needed friends. Astrid cleared her schedule, flying coach for the first time in a decade, and sat in an elementary school auditorium, watching Olivia play a brave little airplane in a story about flying with your heart instead of just your wings. After the play, as parents gathered for juice and cookies in the cafeteria, Olivia introduced Astrid to her classmates as the lady her daddy helped find her heart. Nathan apologized for his daughter's candor, but Astrid just smiled, understanding that children often see truths that adults work hard to hide. She had built an empire but lost her soul, gained the world but forfeited connection, won every battle except the one that mattered most. The fight to remain human in a dehumanizing world. Standing in that school cafeteria, eating store-bought cookies and listening to Olivia explain why her daddy was the best pilot even though he fixed planes now, Astrid understood what Nathan had meant about finding her someone. It wasn't about romantic love or family in the traditional sense, but about choosing to see others as more than stepping stones or obstacles. About recognizing that every person carried a story worth hearing, a life worth following, a heart worth protecting. The emergency landing of Flight 789 became a footnote in aviation history, just another successful crisis management scenario studied in pilot training programs. But for 200 passengers, it remained a defining moment when ordinary people revealed extraordinary character, when assumptions shattered against reality, when a single father's quiet courage saved them all. Nathan continued his work as a maintenance engineer, finding purpose in ensuring other families traveled safely. He never mentioned his heroic actions unless directly asked, and even then, he credited Captain Collins and the entire crew for the successful landing. His life remained centered on Olivia, on homework help and soccer practice, on bedtime stories and morning pancakes, on keeping his promise to Sarah that their daughter would grow up knowing she was loved more than life itself. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when Olivia was asleep and the apartment was still, Nathan would stand by the window and watch planes passing overhead, their navigation lights blinking in the darkness. He would think about that moment of decision in business class, about choosing between a promise to stay safe and a promise to keep her safe, about how sometimes the greatest courage isn't in the dramatic gesture, but in the daily choice to show up, to be present, to love without reservation or requirement. The story could have ended differently, with tragedy instead of triumph, with loss instead of lessons learned. But in that crucial moment, when Captain Henry Collins asked for help, when systems failed and storms raged, when judgment yielded to desperation, a humble single father stood up and reminded everyone that heroes don't always wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they wear faded jackets and carry unicorn backpacks, their superpower nothing more or less than the determination to protect what matters most. And in first-class seats or economy rows, in boardrooms or break rooms, in moments of crisis or quiet contemplation, perhaps that's the only measure of worth that truly counts. Not what we've accumulated, but what we're willing to sacrifice. Not what we've achieved, but whom we've chosen to become. Not the heights we've reached, but the hands we've extended to help others climb. The rain continued to fall gently on Shannon that night, washing the emergency foam from the runway, carrying away the evidence of near disaster. But in a small hotel restaurant, 3 unlikely souls shared a meal and discovered that sometimes the greatest journeys aren't measured in miles traveled, but in walls dismantled, in judgments released, in hearts open to possibilities previously unimagined. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change everything.